And we're live.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome again to the Blog Talk Garage. We had set up the garage originally to talk a lot about the mechanics of blogging, but because the garage is flexible, we can change that on a whim. So we decided, with some input from the folks at DML, to have a discussion about online identity, aimed specifically at the cohort of PhD researchers and students who are kind of entering this field and trying to figure out perhaps how they incorporate social media and their online presence into their work. And there's all kinds of issues that we can talk about with regards to identity, and we're kind of going to take that lens about for people in our academic fields and what they should think about, what works, what doesn't work. And so to do this, I've assembled a great panel of guests, many of them who have been doing this for years, but we also have two of the people in the cohorts who are rather new to this. So we want to have a mix of people who did have experience to talk about and people who are at the stage of trying to figure out how things go. As a little sort of thing for introducing, I had asked each of our guests to decide which of their online identities or profiles, it could be Twitter, it could be Facebook, could be even LinkedIn, come on, or even their blog, that are really most important to them in the work that they do. And so they're going to introduce themselves first. So if I was actually doing this, I'm just the host, I would actually hold up my thing and say, hi, I'm Cogdog, but in real life, I'm Alan Levine. And so that's how we're going to introduce ourselves. While they are doing that, I'm going to be doing a little bit of online looking around to sort of see what comes up for them. So we're going to have a little play with that, and we're going to ask Bonnie Stewart to be our first contestant to introduce herself. So Bonnie?
Come on down. I am Bon Stewart. I can't see if I've got that in there. There we go. Bon Stewart on Twitter, and Bonnie Stewart in real life in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. A couple of years ago, had I done this, I probably actually would have put my blog post or my blog homepage up rather than Twitter. But over the past couple of years, Twitter has really become probably the most common space that links my different digital identities together and connects me with the broadest group of people. I kind of fell onto the web. So digital identity is something that I have been studying fairly actively for the past couple of years. I am 2 days away from defending my dissertation Friday morning, looking at network scholarship and how influence and engagement and sort of attention operate in that space, particularly on Twitter. And that's one of the reasons, as I've done that research primarily on Twitter, why Twitter has become so central to my own networking. But I've also been watching sort of changes in the way that scholars and academics are using social media, and Twitter remains a fairly central hub for people to make connections because it's so open and it allows for people to kind of leap into conversations with others. But blogging is really where it started for me, and I know a lot of the people here, and I kind of fell onto the web accidentally, had no intention of really ever doing anything terribly academic with it, was writing as a narrative blogger and myself for a while before I decided to go back to school in mid-career. And what I noticed in those early years blogging and on Twitter was that these really sort of strong connections developed. Whole other aspects of my own identity found expression on the web that I really had never had a place for in my day-to-day life. And at the same time, as the early blogging web began to monetize and become a more branded space, I noticed what was changing with capital moving into that and the ways that people interacted with each other shifting. And so when I went back to start my PhD almost 5 years ago, I thought, I'd really like to look at this and look at how identity operates in these digital spaces. Who are we when we're online? And so that's essentially been the guiding question and curiosity that have both driven my research over the past couple of years, but also fed my research. I've had the privilege of probably half the links that are in my dissertation are things that came to me through my, fairly carefully curated but fairly large network of people that I follow who are half interested in the same things that I'm interested in. And so it's been a really enriching community for me. And when it came time for me to actually do my study, I was able just to put my call for papers out on my blog, tweet it, and then it kind of went around from there. Had about 150 retweets, and so I was able to get the numbers of people to have a fairly robust, small but robust ethnographic group of research participants talking about Twitter, and Twitter is very much the core for me.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie. And we wanted to give Bonnie a little bit more time because she actually has to run because she is actually defending this week. So it's pretty special that she was able to drive into the garage. I'm going to ask Anna next to introduce herself with her chosen identity, and we'll see what happens.
Hi, my name is Anna. I chose my Twitter account mainly because that's what I'm using right now most at the DML Commons. So, well, I'm a second-year doctorate student at Indiana University. Here I mostly work with making and maker spaces. I'm super interested in participatory design from a Scandinavian perspective. And right now, well, yeah, I'm working on DML Commons a little bit, hanging out in the different hangouts, helping to organize or co-facilitate some of the units. And so I'm really trying to use this as an opportunity to learn how to use those social media tools better, especially Twitter. But then I also started blogging, and here what you can see on the screen, that was my website, and it's really out of date, and I feel very terrible about it, but I've never had time to update it in the past, I guess, 2 years. So yeah, that's me, and so I'm glad to be here learning from all the more experienced social media personnel here in this hangout.
Thank you, Anna. We really appreciate you joining us. And of course, it's naive to think that like people who are entering this field have no social presence. You already do, obviously. And so it's thinking about what it means, perhaps, in the context of the work that you're doing. So we're going to shift now to go to Richmond, Virginia, to talk to Loara, and we're going to see what she chooses to represent herself.
I choose, maybe that's the wrong one. This one? Is that right? I choose Google Guacamole because I tweet. And I have actually been introduced to people at conferences as Google Guacamole, so it's kind of replaced my real name. But I'm Loara Gogia, and I am the Graduate Fellow at Virginia Commonwealth University Academic Learning Transformation Lab, or ALT Lab. And my account says that I've been on Twitter since February 2013, but in reality, I've been really been on Twitter for about a year now. And I started out with the encouragement of my boss, John Becker, and Gardner Campbell, who said Twitter was the place to be. So what I did to get started in Twitter was I just started looking at live streamed seminars and conferences, and started live tweeting what other people had to say. And what I found was that my tweets got a lot of buzz from the people who were presenting. They started thanking me for live tweeting their seminars, and people started following me just because they didn't have time to listen to the Google Hangouts or attend or do any of the webinars. So they started just following me because I was summarizing all of them. And that gave me a lot of confidence to start putting out my own content as well. So at this point, I would say Twitter is the place where scholarship comes alive for me. It's a very exciting, very rich, very energetic place for me. I get a chance to talk to more established scholars. I ask them questions. I find that my learning network on Twitter saves me a lot of time. Like I was trying to write a section for my dissertation on reification, but I could not figure out where that word came from. I kept seeing it in different places, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. I type it into my Twitter network, and Frances Bell comes back 2 minutes later and says, "That's winger." I'm like, oh my God, she probably saved me like 3 hours, you know. So I use Twitter for that sort of thing. I use it to collaborate. I've actually met a bunch of scholars, including a bunch of people here today, and I'm actually really excited to hear your voices because we've just been talking on Twitter. I use it to check my ideas and get feedback. I use it to experiment, including the Twitter Journal Club, which Alan just put up. That's something that I'm playing around with on the side. But I just find that Twitter gives me amazing professional opportunities. It's helped me out as a student. It's given me name recognition. As I said, like at conferences, people will actually introduce me as Google Guacamole. And just a lot of personal opportunities around feeling like I'm part of a group, feeling empowered as an emerging scholar, and just freedom to play around. So.
Oh, thank you so much. And I could tell when I was doing the search there, which I hadn't done before, is like you've really kind of filled out what Google brings up. And you are a real doctor.
Yeah, I am. And actually, my original foray into social media and Google and all of this stuff was about search engine optimization because I was a physician. I stopped practicing and have come back for a PhD in educational research and evaluation, and I felt the need to change my my search engine presence, which meant pushing my blog, pushing my Twitter presence, just figuring out how to do that to try to get all of those physician rating scale things like lower down. So yeah, that was actually my original reason for paying attention to my web identity.
Fascinating. And of course, it's to think about the fact that, you know, you had this whole established identity in the medical field.
Right.
So we're going to jump all the way over to Cairo, Egypt, to talk to Maha Bali. And this is really a special thing because we actually get to talk with her. She thought she might be busy parenting. So tell us a little bit about your social identity, Maha.
So I chose Twitter. I thought for a minute that I would choose my blog, and then I thought about like people like Bonnie and Loara I met originally by reading their blogs, but I engaged with them through Twitter. And so I think the beautiful thing about Twitter is that engagement, that you can actually meet people that you normally wouldn't imagine you could talk to, and they often respond to you. And it's something that Loara was talking about. You meet people who are much more established, and they will respond to you, and that normally you wouldn't be able to like email someone, but if you tweet them, they'll probably respond to you, and that's what I love about it. That's the image search for me, and that I'm just terribly unlucky that there's some mythical king called Maha, so all the images you find are of that person.
Where are you? You're not even here.
I show up eventually, probably on my own Google search, which tells you something, but and so I think, especially for me, I was doing my PhD in England, but I wasn't living in England most of the time, so I didn't have chances to connect with other students or with a lot of faculty beyond my supervisor, except for the week or two that I spent over there. And getting on Twitter just like a year and a half ago, before I finished my PhD, helped me make connections with other scholars, other PhD students who were finishing. And then as soon as I finished my PhD, I felt confident enough to start blogging and then start doing connectivist MOOCs, and that's mainly where my Twitter presence grows and how I meet people. So I get into a MOOC, I'm with people for a certain amount of time, working on something together, and then I start just connecting these people beyond that. So so that's where I use Twitter a lot. And I've also noticed, like, what I do on Twitter is I watch what other people are doing and I try things out. So I've seen things by people like Jesse Stommel who are really good at using Twitter, and I notice what they do, and then I start to realize, oh, look at how he's thinking out loud, look at how he's amplifying other people. And as I've become a little bit more active there, I've started to try to do the same thing. And I think you know, sometimes you think you're joining a place like Twitter to amplify your own voice and you're pushing your own thing, and then you start to realize that it's actually more helpful for connecting with people and pushing other people and amplifying their voices, and then connecting people with each other also. So that's it for now. And
All
We'll
right.
talk again.
Thanks a lot, Maha. And again, it's great to have you join us on camera and in voice. It just makes it that more. We were having like in the pre-setup session, we're like, oh, it's so nice to meet you and talk to you for the first time, and I feel the same way. And so I'm really also pleased to welcome Jacqueline, who again is part of the DML cohort. And so I don't know whether to call her, because I really don't know much about her. So I'm going to let her introduce herself
All
and
right.
sort of figure out where she is on social.
All right. Hi, I'm Jacqueline Vickery. I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Texas, which is in Denton, which is about 30 miles north of Dallas, which is actually where I am. I struggled when they asked me to pick one online identity to start with because I blog and I Twitter and I Facebook and I use academia. But since everyone's talking Twitter, I thought maybe I would go with my blog, which is jrvickery.com. I have been blogging since I got my first laptop when I was 18, and I found a huge, amazing blogging community when I was younger, and then when I started graduate school, when I was 23, it dawned on me that people would actually Google me, and I wasn't very comfortable with the blog at the time being what people found. I mean, I wouldn't say it was inappropriate, but it certainly wasn't like an academic, professional space, and so then I quit blogging for a while, and then I tried again, and then I quit, and then I tried again, because I really, really missed it. And so I say all that to say I've had a lot of anxiety around it, but I've now had the blog that I have currently since 2009, I believe, so when I was a PhD student. And I find it incredibly useful. I think like a lot of us that study youth, it's important to me to have a voice and to have to reach an audience that expands outside of academia. And actually, this is pure coincidence, but this morning I got an email from someone who found my blog. He's a father, and he's giving a talk at a high school tonight about privacy and social media, and he was asking me if I could send him some articles and chat with him. And I was like, this is why I have a blog, is to reach kind of that audience outside of people that are maybe reading my published work. And I find that blogging gives me a space to retain a voice outside of academia, because I love writing and I don't always love academic writing. So I find like blogging gives me that kind of other space to also write in a different tone. And I try to blog about current events that are happening and related to my field. And so I'm also more than happy to talk about Facebook and Twitter, because I love those spaces as well. But for me, my blog is incredibly important for having that voice and also having kind of a archive of all of my work on there and links to it, etc. So I'll leave it with that.
All right, thank you so much. And wow, I mean, you bring a lot to the table. It reminds me when I was teaching at University of Mary Washington, I had a student when she was setting up her blog for DS 106, and she was really excited because she said, I've been on YouTube since I was like 9, and she has this long history of what was attached to her name, and she was looking forward to crafting her new identity because it wasn't like she was embarrassed by it, but she really wanted to establish herself now as a student and possibly someone moving into the field. The last person, he's been on the internet a little bit, I think, has a little bit of experience. You know, he's got a lot to learn, so I want to ask Alec Couros maybe to tell us a little bit about what he hopes to do with his identity.
Hey, thanks for having me today. So on Twitter, you see that? I play Couros, so that's my performance anyway. That's the person I am, and I think that's a good way to start thinking of it. I mean, Twitter, I can go back to the blogging days, as Bonnie mentioned earlier, and thinking about how it sort of all started there, and I've been really interested in these spaces since, seriously, probably since about 2001. I think started blogging in 2003. But Twitter has been, I guess, one of the key places for me in the last few years. It's brought to me through it, you know, the idea of some amazing collaborations. I can go back through some of my blog posts and that sort of thing, and a lot of them reflect on the types of things that I would put out on Twitter and get some immediate and amazing collaborations and feedback from people. So as a graduate student, while I was going, I think Twitter just began at the time I ended my my PhD studies. So it's given me some amazing opportunities for collaboration. It's documented my thinking for the past 7 years since I've been on Twitter. I often use it to kind of go back and search the things that I've been thinking over some of the years. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned, I guess has been mentioned implicitly, is the idea of friendships. Often it's difficult, we don't talk about this, it's difficult for a male to come out with some really interesting friendships post-high school. We just don't hang out with guys. But through academic collegial opportunities, I've been able to meet people and have really, forged really strong friendships over years. And those friendships and social supports have been pivotal through my academic career, but also my personal life as well, in terms of the bad and sad and happy and good throughout the past few years. Opportunities from a professional standpoint that I couldn't have ever imagined. I mean, I'm in London right now for a conference, and I've got a couple of other ones coming up, and back in North America. But it's the types of profile that it can allow you to help build when you start thinking about openness, when you take work that you think is okay and put it out there and people notice it. That just the sociality that happens around shared work over Twitter sometimes triggers something amazing, and I think many of us have been recipients of that gift economy that provides even something bigger for our own careers and so on. And of course, probably the most important part for me is the incredible possibilities for pedagogy that it has provided me with my students, whether it's building their own identities or looking at the possibilities in the classroom, but helping them become connected and more aware of the world that we live in today, thinking about their own digital identities. I think there was actually at a conference yesterday, OER 15 in Cardiff, when we presented some of our ideas about helping students build identities online, the question often comes back, around, the ethics of that. Can we reasonably allow our students to share their pieces of content online? And I think it's incredibly important that we think about the other side of that ethical question, is can we afford not to? Can we afford not to sort of let people go out there and think about their identities in intentional ways? I've thought over years that for many years, when we think about our identity, we often go back to the idea that most identities are formed by interaction, something I've created, the interactions that I've done over time, and it's attributed to a particular person. And in some ways, I know there's sort of a push to make things a little bit invisible, that I might have done something behind an LMS, or I've posted something online. It's not really attributed to me. So I think it's an important this is an important question, I think, to start thinking about identity with our students. So anyway, Twitter and the networks that surround it have been incredible, and I would say that it's something I strongly support for graduate student researchers, for undergrads as well, and anyone interested in developing a number of social supports and friendships, and of course professional opportunities.
Thanks, Alec, and I was impressed because on the search for your name, like, all the pictures are you. I've never seen that happen. Either it's because your name is unusual, or because you were that good at establishing your identity. It's like usually there's one ringer that shows up in there that's not the person, but man, I think you got it. And I hope when we get to talking about some of the possible downsides, you talk about some of your experience.
Of course, yeah.
With what's happened in your name. So. I sort of had this idea to ask a series of structured questions, and I can already see it's getting a little bit chaotic, but I think because for people who may not have invested much time in this, one of the things is talk about perhaps how much time do you put into it, or what did you give up in terms of time in your life? Like, I gave up TV is my answer to do this. And maybe even how you deal with explaining it to your family as to why you're spending a lot of time on the computer. And I think Jacqueline wanted to first jump in, and then Maha, if that's okay. And anybody else, just jump in. That's the way we're going to do this.
Sure. I wish I blogged more than I did, but I also will say I spend a lot of time constructing my online identity, particularly anytime I publish something new. I'm always amazed how much time it takes for me to put that article in academia and Twitter and Facebook and my own blog and my faculty profile with my university. But I find it's incredibly important. The last article I published back in December, within 2 days I had received feedback and email from people who read it, and I don't think it's because I'm so awesome, and they were just waiting for my latest article. But because I spent a lot of time promoting it, and already being invested in networks where I have people that read my blog and follow my Twitter and academia, etc. And so I'm constantly Googling myself and trying to see what comes up and making sure that the research that I'm most vested in right now is hopefully what people are finding. So I would say at least once a week I'm checking my profiles and my analytics and trying to see who's finding me and what they're finding through that. I wish I blogged more. I usually blog when I get really fired up about something, and I just need to get the thoughts out of my head. But yeah, I feel like especially if you've got work coming out. I'm a professor, but I'm still a junior scholar. I'm in my 3rd year, so for me, it's really important to make sure that people are actually reading what I'm spending time doing. So for me, I would say at least one day a week, I spend an hour or so just making sure everything's up to date in the way I want it to look.
Okay, and that's a really good consideration. Of course, the thing that comes up for junior scholars is there's a lot of things you have to be paying attention to. Where does this all fit in? We're going to jump to Bonnie because she has to run off, I think, pretty soon. And what do you want to? You can say whatever you want, Bonnie. Obviously.
What I wanted to talk about in terms of time is it definitely does take time to build an identity. And one of the things about digital identity is it kind of ends up existing out in the long tail of the internet, right? Very few of us, even if we put in a ton of time to our network scholarship, are going to necessarily end up famous for it, but you do end up with this small targeted group of people who gradually come to know who you are. And the time invested in the research that I did over the past year or so, what I found was that the time invested really does pay off in the long run, but like joining a gym, you almost need to give it a little bit of the long run. So people often will sort of give it a shot and go, nothing's happening, and then let it go and not stick with it. And if you are willing to see it as a long-term, it doesn't have to be a ton of your time, but as a long-term goal where you are building your own network, not just your visibility or your identity as a thing, but more of a living friendship, professional sort of combination of resources and people who work with you and help you work, then people tended to be able to stick with it longer. And that was part of the narratives that I found from the people who participated in my research, that they all kind of said they had gone in maybe with a fairly simple digital identity concept. They were just going to build a little bit of a profile, or they had just gone in to see what it was about. But it was at the 6-month mark, the year mark, the 2-year mark, that it really began to continue to enrich and pay off for them. And so for people who are brand new and just thinking about starting, if you're a grad student or any kind of educator or professional who wants to engage in this, give it some time, find the people, follow the people that are here today, look at the people we talk to and who talks actively, because some people are more active than others. If you only follow, celebrities and you're talking to Ellen DeGeneres, she's probably not going to talk back to you because she's got 1 million people who are tweeting at her. But find the people who are actually engaging with other people and be willing to make the first move a few times and engage in things like hashtags. Recently, especially in the last year, a lot of people are saying that they're finding new followers through hashtags and courses and things like what we're doing today. So look at who's out there and be willing to put in the time to sort of make the connections with those people. One of the people that has maybe made the quickest rise to being super networked as a relative latecomer that I've ever seen is Maha, who about 1.5 years ago really just made the effort to get to know all of us and has hugely both become a friend and also enriched my work. And so it isn't ever too late to start, but it is the kind of thing where the rewards and the return are cumulative over time.
Excellent, and yeah, I absolutely agree with the way you describe Maha. And of course, she is not the only blogger, ed tech person from Egypt, although it seems like that because she's so active. But she demonstrates a lot of things. I mean, she's learning this stuff as she goes, but also the way she described the whole idea about amplifying other people's ideas. So, Maha, do you want to talk about some of the issues? I mean, you're a mom of a young daughter. You're a wife, and you live in a context much different from the rest of us. How do you deal with what people sort of think about what you're doing?
Right. So, you've complicated the question. I was ready to say something else.
Do whatever you want.
Yes. So, I mean, I was just going to talk about how I weave time in for all of this. And so there's part of it where blogging has become just the thing I do when I think. I just write it. And a lot of us write things down when we're thinking. I mean, I think most academics, or if you're doing a PhD, you have to have a notepad all the time. And if you're a scholar and you're doing research, you need to take notes somewhere. So instead of taking them on a notepad that I will probably lose, I just put them on my blog. And so it becomes part of my lifestyle. It becomes my way of curating my thinking. It becomes my way of showing people in a MOOC that I'm reading their blogs and putting everything together and taking my thinking forward. So it just becomes part of my day. And I have a long commute to and from work, so that's usually when I blog. And sometimes when I write my column for hybrid pedagogy and things like that. The other thing is, because I was finishing my PhD with a young child, I learned not to sleep a lot so that as soon as she slept I could work. So it's probably not very advisable, but I don't sleep a lot. And so a lot of that time I use for a little bit of work, but also a lot of connecting with people. And because that's a good time zone for the US, it works very well for making friends with people like you guys. And my early morning is the same kind of thing. But the thing with Twitter especially, and Alec reminded me of this because he talked about pedagogy, is that when I started using it with my students, I also noticed that it helped them reach me faster than, I mean, they'd be embarrassed to call me on my phone if they needed something. They're not really good with email, and they send emails without subject headings and stuff, and they can get missed really easily. But if anybody wants me, they can find me on Twitter. Like, my colleagues at work know that now. They won't try to call me or anything. They'll just, oh man, no. Sorry, Java just tried to update all of a sudden. Anyway, so the thing about Twitter especially is that you can get the notifications on your phone, and so even if my daughter is playing around, I can still check that. It's probably not the best thing that I'm not looking at her all the time and not playing with her all the time, but I can sort of play with her and feed her and do things while I'm doing it a little bit, so that my mind is half here and half there, but it's just multitasking that I think most moms do anyway. So.
All right, and speaking of moms, Loara wanted to talk a little bit about the situation dealing with her kids.
Yeah, I've got two small kids. I've got two girls who are 7 and 9, and they always see me on my computer, and they're of an age where they'll sit next to me and say, "Mommy, why are you always on the computer?" Because I'm always on the computer, and obviously doing a whole bunch of different things on the computer, which I try to share with them. But when it comes to Twitter, I explain to them that I'm talking to people all over the world, and that just grabs their imagination. Like, they actually support my use of Twitter for work because they want to know exactly who I'm talking to across the world, when I'm talking to them, what I'm talking about. I find that I have a great amount of support in my family for using Twitter for work because they see what I'm doing on it. It's research collaborations that my husband understands that's really, really important, and it's work that I wouldn't necessarily get to do if I were just in my physical location. And again, my kids just love the fact that I'm talking to people all over the world, and we get out a globe and we actually make it part of their learning experience as well. So it makes them think more on a global, international scale. So that's another reason why I like using Twitter.
All right, and speaking of which, I mean, most of us chose Twitter as our identified handle, and Jacqueline actually asked on Twitter, and she's here too. What about Facebook? I mean, everybody is there, and sort of, I know a lot of academics are going to have to deal with the whole separation of personal and professional things. Where does Facebook fit into this whole bit of your professional identity? So thanks, Bonnie. She has to slip out, so we're on wave to Bonnie. Does anyone, Jacqueline, do you want to talk a little bit about your perspective on Twitter? I mean, Facebook?
Or Facebook? Sure. So I've also, I think like probably several of us here, I've been on Facebook since I was a senior in college, and so I've had to figure out how to transition Facebook from a college identity to now teaching college and being professional. But for me, where Facebook has become really valuable is the groups. So I participate in what's called Teaching Media, which is a Facebook group for graduate students and professors who teach anything with media. And what's nice about that is that it's very focused, and so we come in and we ask questions like, hey, I'm teaching about privacy this week and I need a short reading, or I want a screening, or does anyone have an activity that has worked? And so we get a lot of advice from each other. We share a lot of resources. But what I like about it too is with the groups, your privacy settings, you don't have to friend those people. And so, they can click on my Facebook profile and see, my basic information, but I'm not friends with them, and so I don't feel like I have to negotiate these privacy issues because it is a giant group. There's about 1,500 of us, but it allows access to collaborative resources in a way that Twitter does, but is also archived differently, and you can go through and search the Facebook group differently than I feel like with Twitter, and in also a way that we can talk about. I mean, we don't talk about students a whole lot, but sometimes people have questions like, I have a student who's really struggling. Does anyone have advice? And that's the kind of thing I feel like isn't appropriate on Twitter because my students are there. Whereas with Facebook, because it's a group, we don't allow any students into that space. So it kind of gives us a sense of privacy. And I'm also a part of one called F3, which is a feminist media group as well. So for me, groups have been where I find I can kind of find resources, but also not feel like I'm letting people into my Facebook world and having to juggle this privacy issue so much.
Thank you. And I'm getting this sense, it's not anything new, but thinking about Alec's network teacher diagram, is that there are so many places in which we have a presence, so it's kind of not even realistic to talk about one identity in one place. We swirl and we choose among these places to where to focus attention, but it's not like one really predominates. And so Alec's going to talk about Facebook, but if anybody else wants to add on, I'm also thinking a lot about what the impact is of stuff that's distributed versus stuff that you maintain, such as on your own blog. But Alec, on Facebook?
So Facebook, I think Facebook's evolved as well as people's use of Facebook has evolved. And I know people used to use sort of like the saying, like Facebook is for people that you know, and Twitter is for people you don't yet know that you want to know. And that's sort of how it started, I think, for me. But it's come to the point where for me, certainly, I will know people on Twitter, and Facebook had started out as my high school friends and people that I knew a bit better from conferences and in my perhaps closer colleagues. And I found that, as you get to know people on Twitter as well, that's when you start to see the connection to Facebook, and I get to know particular people a bit deeper. So it's an expanded Dunbar number. The idea that Dunbar's number was, I think you can know about 120 people or so on, but really that number is expanded for me certainly, and I end up knowing in a fairly good sense, people's kids, their interests, the things that's going on in their life from Facebook, and that's really turned, like the things that I post to Facebook have been much more of a personal nature. Notice that I'm certainly, where my kids go and the more personal details, things that I'm proud of perhaps, or I think Facebook is more excusable to do a bit of a humble brag from time to time versus Twitter, I think. Twitter for me has actually in some ways become, although there's that fun part of it, and I think it's really important that with all these social networks, you need to at least certainly have a good balance of the sociality and the fun and the humor as well as the seriousness as well. But I think in some ways Facebook has been able to expand on that. I know many people are sort of anti-Facebook, but really if you negotiate these spaces in ways that work for you, I think that's the best strategy. And in that particular case, that's just the way it works for me. Twitter is great for making new connections. Facebook is for deepening those connections.
Thanks a lot. We have a question from Anna, and so, of course, again, she's kind of, I don't want to say new, I don't want to separate us into the new and old class, because, just listening to Jackie is like she's got more experience than me, but Anna did have a really good question I think is worth asking, and maybe why you thought of this question.
Oh, sure. I'm okay with being new. I'm just wondering, that now that we're bringing up so many different kinds of spaces, where we are online, like Facebook, Twitter, and then here in the sort of back channel chat, somebody brought up academia.edu. And so I'm just wondering, how do you negotiate not just what to share where, but also thinking about duplication? I mean, that really links back to the kind of time you want to spend, but also how much oversharing, or what amount of sharing would be considered oversharing or not a productive use of our time, and how do you negotiate sharing what for which audience and so forth. So that would be something that I'd be very interested in hearing your experience about.
Excellent, thanks a lot. And a piece that also leads into what was going to be the next question, which people can choose when they respond, is like, what do you do to gauge or measure that? Do you pay a lot of attention to statistics and metrics? So I'm going to turn it over to Loara to jump in first and sort of the strategies that Anna asked about. Anything else, of course, you want to add, Loara?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important question. Where do you share what? And it was something that I experimented with in a recent MOOC where I was trying to start a research group within the MOOC. And I found that different platforms support different types of things, like Twitter for signal amplification, but I would have to write the meat of what I was trying to explain on my blog. And I use academia.edu for finished pieces, like things that I've actually completed that someone might want to download, So I think each of those platforms supports a different type of communication, and sometimes it takes experimentation to see how they all fit together. Like Google Plus, for example, is a great place for longer form discussion and sharing. So all the pieces kind of fit together, but you don't necessarily put the exact same thing on each of those platforms. As far as metrics, I find that I get a little obsessed with my metrics around my blog, to the point where I actually wrote a poem about it a while back, because I don't get a lot of comments on my blog. I don't know whether people are actually reading my blog, so I tend to focus on the metrics there. I don't look at anything related to Twitter at all, because I know if someone's listening, because they talk back to me and we have a conversation about it. So that's all I have to say about that. Be careful about getting obsessed about your metrics. They can really put you in a bad mood.
We might ask you at some future time to do the poem, or maybe a performance dance, but that's
interpretive dance. Yeah, I can do that, but not today.
You're so multi-talented. That's why I'm glad you're here, Loara. All right, I lost track. I think Jacqueline was to talk a little bit about academia.edu, which is very appropriate for the audience, and I'm looking forward to hearing this because I know almost nothing about it.
Sure. So I also check my analytics on my own blog on academia.edu, and what I find really helpful with academia.edu is that you can see the search words that people use to get to your work, and you can see, like, for example, if they came from the DML site, Stewart. And also, I have all of my syllabi up there, and I find that that's actually the most popular stuff up there for me, is my syllabi, but it's also really validating to see that people are downloading your work, because not everyone's going to cite you just because they read it, and that takes time, of course, for it to get published, etc. So for me, it's nice to know that someone's actually downloading what I've published and is reading it, and so you can kind of track that. Also, through it, you can track when people are citing you. So in addition to Googling myself, I Google my own work to see where my work has been cited. I'm on the tenure track, and I need that. I need those numbers, and I feel like academia is another way to see that your work is being read, and they make it really easy to do that, and they make it really easy to see where you've been cited, etc. So, I mean, Google Scholar does that as well, but I feel like academia does it in a little bit more visible manner, because you also just see people reading your work, not just necessarily citing it.
Okay, boy, they're making it hard for me to do the traffic direction here. They're in the chat here. They're going every which way. But I'm going to make a decision, folks, because I'm holding the wrench in my pocket. Alec's going to talk about something here. The thing scrolled by so fast. I think there's a little bit of banter going on with Maha about oversharing, and Alec brought up the idea of filters. And I do want to say, like, Alec on his blog taught me this thing really important about. He wrote this thing about like how to follow 15,000 people on Twitter, which sounds ridiculous. And the thing is, you don't read all their tweets, but you come up with strategies to sort of put them into nice bins to do that. I don't know if that's what you're going to talk about, Alec, but take it away.
Well, partially, like I think one of the comments here, and I think that was from Anna, is this idea, should I feel sad or should I feel worried about overshooting? And I think it's really important that we're certainly cognizant of if we are sharing certain things or the wrong things or that sort of thing. But mostly, I mean, throwing things like I talked earlier about how I share different things in Facebook than I share in Twitter, and that's just become a personal piece. But in terms of how many times you tweet an article or a syllabus or something, you are going to have people missing in different time zones. And so I worry less about sharing something a bit too much because I think ultimately we want to rely on people's filters. If someone gets annoyed at you for tweeting something too much, they will follow you. They'll unfollow you, or they have the ability to unfollow you, or they'll mute you, or whatever else. And I think we have to start thinking about not certainly being. It means certainly cognizant if you're sharing too much, if you're spamming people, it becomes a difference. But I think sometimes tweeting the same article that you may have 2 or 3 times is not something so horrible because sometimes it doesn't get picked up by the right people or the people that use it. If you believe in your work, I think it's great to be able to put it out there to get it to the right people. But certainly, how people are able to use filters, it's also important. Like it's an important literacy today is not simply how to filter information. Like for instance, using hashtags was brought up several times. But also, it's vitally important for you to be able to figure out how to get read. So using hashtags to get your information to the right spots is incredibly important. To know what networks this would apply to, whether it's academic.edu or academia.edu or Facebook or Twitter, understanding how to get your work, especially as an academic, to get promoted, to get taken up, to be read by the communities that need it is vitally important. So it's not just about reading information, it's about being able to create and allow your work to be read. And that's one of the most important premises of the open movement, really, is this idea that it's not simply about putting something in an open access journal. Let's get people to it. If you believe in your work, let's make sure that you've established the right filters going forward as a creator to make sure that the work falls in the hands that need it.
All right, thanks a lot. I'm going to ask Maha. I know she had something to respond, but maybe she could also, there's a question from Twitter from Melissa about use of Google+, which is yet another thing out there.
Okay, so I'm not a very heavy Google Plus user, so that's really not the right question for me.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just say what I was going to say. But I agree with everything that Alec was saying, and it reminds me of a post by Lise Callerup-Bissett. It's a pretty old post, actually, about shameless self-promotion and about how when you're a woman or a minority or marginalized person, you're not going to get hurt unless you start to promote yourself. It's not going to happen. Like, who's going to promote you? You have to start doing a little bit of that. And I was accused of being that kind of person in the beginning, and I know I'm doing less of that, but it's not that I'm doing less of it because I decided to. I'm doing less of it because there are enough people who know me now to amplify my voice that I don't have to do it myself. So, for example, now I don't tweet my articles all the time. Other people tweet them, and I sometimes retweet them. And so I don't need to tweet them so often myself anyway. But then sometimes, like, the other thing is about where to publish your work. So I started writing peer-reviewed stuff before I started writing magazine stuff, before I started my blog. And I realized that I started my blog when I thought there's something I want to say that doesn't really belong in anybody else's bin or anybody else's category. I don't want to have to think about who might want to publish this for me. I want to have my own space to publish whatever I want. But then if I have something in my mind that I think a larger group of people could benefit from that really does fit somewhere else, I try to think about opportunities for publishing somewhere else. And it's really good with places like the Chronicle, like Prof Hacker, that would go ahead and publish your stuff really quickly, or some place like Hybrid Pedagogy, which is peer-reviewed but will still review it and publish it quickly, so that if it's a very timely edtech topic, it's still a good place to go. But then sometimes if it's something that you really think needs and would benefit from a lot of going back and forth through peer review, then maybe it's worth going through that. And of course, obviously, people who have to go through tenure would need to do a little bit of that. But even if you do a lot of your stuff openly or on your blog, all of this in the end could lead you towards more research collaborations with other people. And so a lot of the time I'll publish something on my blog because I want to reach people in my social network, not a wider audience, and because I want to invite people to do research with me or to just do any kind of collaboration together. So.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot. And the thing is, like, we had this idea about if we're oversharing or not, and then there's a whole idea about what we think we're doing and how people perceive us, which we really don't have any control over. So it's a little bit of guesswork. My approach is I kind of monitor myself against other people that I respect, and also some maybe that I respect less. So I follow a couple people who I really don't like the way they do things, and I kind of use that as a balanced check. So what were we getting? Oh, let's see. Good question. So Ada, thanks for pointing it out. Kathleen Sheriff, who's from TRU, who I got to meet when I was up there, she has a really good question. Is it possible to change one's digital identity? Stuff is forever. And so how do you go about that? And I think Loara, she kind of talked about this in the beginning, but are there things, that people should think about when they're trying to steer where their identity is going? You want to take that, Loara?
Well, I can start it off just briefly because, yeah, that was actually my initial motivator for why I started actively working on a digital identity in the first place, because my digital identity as a physician was kind of given to me. I mean, these rating systems are out there, and, I honestly didn't even know it was going on when I was a physician. It was only after that I started looking at I Googled myself, and I'm like, oh, I'm a physician, except no, I'm not practicing anymore. What am I going to do about this? And so the first thing is, if you're not creating your own content, people are going to create the content for you. So my first step was creating a blog site, creating accounts across these different social media sites. That would actually start to work against health grades, which was my initial goal, was to knock down health grades from the #1 thing you got when you Googled Loara Gogia to find something else. So I guess my short answer is, you have to create content in order to take control of your own identity. And I think other people probably have other things to say about that as well.
That's an interesting perspective, because in some ways the social media is, you get a quicker payoff because it's shorter, quick, it's rapid, whereas the blogging takes time, and as Loara mentioned, sometimes you don't get any comments and you're like, why am I doing this? The flip side is all that stuff that's external could easily disappear on you, and so there are a lot of people, me among them, who really try to think and be concerned about the way we distribute it and balance that idea about our distributed personas or presence online versus the stuff that we manage. Does anybody want to jump in on that? Are you motioning, Alec?
If you want me to.
I'm
just actually trying to engage on Twitter.
You in the back of the class, Couros.
So in terms of, so you're asking how do we manage some of the bad stuff?
Yeah, you can talk about that because you do have a unique experience.
Right. Okay. So I could talk about my own experience. I was actually just about to tweet something. You caught me in mid-tweet, but that's all right. Yeah. So I have actually, it was interesting. So I've had on the negative side of things, I have some experience, about 8 years going on now at least, of people using my photographs to create fake profiles. Generally, you can Google this up if you type in Alec Couros scammers, and you'll find some other things, or Alec Couros catfishing. So people have used my photographs to create fake profiles, my photos to create fake profiles on dating sites, on Facebook, and so on. So for instance, right now, if you looked at Facebook, if you search for me, you'd find me with the connections I have, and someone with like 2 connections who's using my photographs. I actually just had a conversation with one of these scammers over Facebook today, and they were talking about why they do this. This is the only way they make money in the country they're in, and so on. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But what's interesting about this, so if you will, this has been hundreds and hundreds of profiles, and in many cases they create very interesting and convincing profiles that at some point trigger the victims, the women usually, to send them money, and that's the end game in every one of these particular cases. So this has got me to reflect a lot about digital identity. For instance, if I were to say, I should just have nothing on the internet and no photographs, how would my career look? Well, how would I look as is that even possible today to have no identity? Whereas I'm someone who shares a lot of photographs. You could easily take my photographs and put together any story you want. You could develop whatever story you want from the narratives. I mean, photographs are incredibly strong, especially when coupled together with other photographs. You can create all sorts of alternate narratives, which these people are very good at doing. But the thing is, because I have such a strong digital identity, people will find the real me. They end up finding me. And so I've often thought about this. So as professionals, we could share the odd couple of photographs, and we could still have those things used against us. But I think it goes to Dave White's idea that we really need to look at the idea of digital residency versus being a digital visitor. And I think that's, as an academic, we have to strive towards that. And there's all sorts of pitfalls, and these things happen to good people, and these happen to bad people, and they happen to just about everyone out there. And there's all sorts of there's difficult things on the web when we share things online. But ultimately, we have to come, from my perspective, we come to the realization that it's worth it. That if we want to be citizens, whether it's of the web or of just a citizen of our countries, we have to take some risks that allow us to be a bit more vulnerable. And now, of course, I can't speak. I'm the only male in this room, and I speak from a very privileged standpoint for a white male, I guess I was putting that together, in terms of what I can say online. And so I can't speak for everyone in this room, but I think from my particular perspective, certainly, I'm able to sort of counter some of these difficult things online as well. For academics, this is increasingly important, especially when we start to look at gender and other, look at other forms of identity as well. So,
thanks, Alec. I mean, that would be a whole worthy topic of itself, the way you dealt with this, because it also impacts, because some pictures of you with your kids were brought in this, and so I've marveled at your decision to stay committed to being an open presence online in light of things which would have sent most people to say, forget this, I'm unplugging. I knew this was going to happen, that we would run out of time. We didn't even get to like 5% of the questions. Some people didn't get to speak a lot. We're going to ask you to continue tweeting your questions. I think Maha maybe has some ideas about some ways to do some future ongoing sort of compiling of these questions, maybe in Google Docs like you did for your recipe thing. And I thought, maybe I'll put her on her spot. She kind of said, but Anna's she hasn't had to say much. But you're one of the people that we sort of wanted to target in this. Are you going to leave with anything that you're thinking about, given the bits of rambling conversation that we've had here?
Yeah, I think just being here and seeing the chat flowing and talking and listening has been really inspiring, just to see, how diverse we can really start approaching our social media profiles, and how to be able to curate them in terms of how we listen to others and so forth. I think especially something that stuck with me is something that Alec mentioned, but then was also picked up on various tweets online as people started listening, was the sense of sort of, as an open practitioner in this space, as a scholar in this space, can we really afford not to be online, and how to start negotiating that. And I think there's some really interesting stuff going on Twitter in this sense, and I hope that conversation moves forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just scrolled down my Twitter thing, and there's like 30 tweets that have great questions. So we're going to try to find a way. Sorry if we didn't get to everything that people want to know. Obviously, this is a really it's an important thing to talk about is what I'm trying to say and find the words for. And so I'm glad we had this chance to actually just start a conversation. So we'll try to continue it in Twitter, in our blogs, maybe in the discussion forums. But thanks again to everybody for coming into the garage. Jameson, do you want to do anything close, or do you just turn out the lights when we're done in the garage here? Jameson.